Hello, welcome to Voting Smart. This is Barbara Connor. We're awfully glad you could join us. This is a show all about informing voters, so this is a very important topic this year. Now, what we have today is a very special discussion and some introduction to our community and our cultural range, our gumbo with the diversity, okay? And so we will be reaching out in particular to New Iberia, or rather Iberia Parish, excuse me. Our AOC community media does reach 5 parishes, and so we are delighted today to welcome Phanat Xanamane.
Yes.
Thank you for
Savadi.
being Zavadi. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, I'm so glad that you could make the trip. I know you run a lot of miles in this area.
Oh yes, well, you know.
You're teaching at LSU, and you come to Lafayette, and then you're working on some big projects in New Iberia.
In Iberia. I'm all over the place. Oh man, I just consider the whole Acadiana, Atchafalaya basin my home, my territory, and I just am sort of urban nomad, I guess you can say. I like to refer to myself as an urban nomad.
Well, I remember you said that you grew up in New Iberia.
Yes.
Your parents had a small business there.
Yes.
And you were going to tell me, if you don't mind, starting with some of your personal background.
Sure. Well, I was born in Thailand in a refugee camp in 1981, and my parents were Laotian refugees in that refugee camp. They had actually crossed over from the Mekong River from neighboring Laos, following the Vietnam War conflict, into Thailand and settled in the northeastern part of Thailand, where there were a lot of many other people seeking refuge, and they stayed in that part of Thailand for a while before they were actually accepted into the refugee camp and were processed. And I was born in a place called Phanat, at Nikom, actually, in the southern part of Thailand, about a couple miles outside of Bangkok, the capital there. And after that, you know, my family, they just wanted better opportunity for themselves and for their children. And America, you know, was marketed as being the place of opportunity. So they got on a list to come to the States. Right. And in the early 80s and the late 70s, around that time, there was a large migration of Laotian immigrants that came to the United States and settled really all over the world, but there was several sort of large pockets around the States. And one very, very small pocket happened to be in the Iberia Parish and in New Iberia area. And there were, at that time, a lot of ecumenical organizations, like Catholic organizations that would sort of sponsor these refugees and set them up in a new life there. And so that's why my family settled in this area. And they settled in sort of the western edge of New Iberia city, in a sort of lower income neighborhood, as many other immigrants at that time did, and took on some non-skilled labor jobs in the factories in the area, whether it was Bruce's Foods or picking peppers on Avery Island, or shucking oysters or peeling crawfish. Those were the primary sort of occupations of many Laotians at that time. My parents started for the first couple years in that occupation, but then they broke off, and there was a sort of small budding Laotian community happening in Iberia Parish, and my mother recognized that, and she was actually a market merchant in Laos. She sold vegetables and fresh vegetables and herbs at the marketplace back in her village in Laos, and she always had this knack for business, and she wanted to create a Asian or Laotian specific market, and they opened up the Asia market in, I believe, 1984 or 85. And in the west end of New Iberia along Hopkins Street, and had that business for, boy, it was maybe 20, 25 years or so.
Oh,
and it was very successful. The Laotian community kept on growing, and we did well for ourselves, and my mother was able to send me to college in to get an education. I went to UL and majored in architecture there.
Architecture.
Yes,
Uh-huh.
and I decided afterwards to pursue a graduate education at Columbia University in urban design. And you know, at that time, my mother had decided that to leave the grocery business behind and go into a plant nursery business in central Louisiana, and that was very lucrative for her. And they were able to send me to New York City and get my education there, and that's was really nice to not have to worry financially so much about those sort of things when you are trying to focus on getting an education. So I was very blessed, I guess is the word, and very grateful for my family's generosity. So I did that in New York City, studied urban design, and then I stayed in New York City for about 5 years, between 2004 and 2008. And it was a great experience. I mean, I learned so much experiencing the diversity there, and the great art and the great culture there, and just
And architecture.
and architecture,
Yes.
yes, and the great public spaces for an urban designer to be in New York City. And at some point, I think I was starting to get learn enough to where I was ready to do my own work. I didn't want to work, you know, under a master artist or a master designer anymore. I wanted to really do my own thing, and so I wanted to come back to Louisiana and re-engage with the community. Growing up in the Laotian community in New Iberia, it was very strange. I'll get into that
Okay.
a little later. But
Well, we are going to get on with also, I know you had a very special occasion not long ago, but I wanted to mention, I think it's very interesting that you also worked in Bangkok, Thailand.
yes, about the same time I was deciding to come back to Louisiana, this just opportunity fell in my lap of a teaching position at the university, Chulalongkorn University, which is the big top university in Thailand. And Thailand is right next door to Laos, and very culturally and language-wise very similar. And I couldn't pass it up. I just needed to. I said, well, Louisiana can wait maybe another year, and I should go to Thailand and try to experience the culture in its homeland, in its in its home base, and see where the origins of my culture. And growing up in an immigrant family, you would have two lives. You have your American life, when you go to school, and then you come home, and then there was this whole other world that you dealt with. You spoke a different language when you went home, right? So, and you didn't really understand it because the context was completely missing. Right, the people, the landscape was completely different.
Right.
So it was so removed from, it's literally on the other side of the world. So that I really didn't understand it growing up. So I wanted to take that time, that year, to go to Bangkok and travel to Laos and see that.
That's interesting what you say, because on my visit to your temple, I was enchanted by the fact that so much of the culture has been maintained and is passing along through religion, and then, of course, at least at this occasion, in dress, and of course language and so forth. And yet these are people who have also been very prosperous in the outer context. But I've got to ask you about that scarf before we go
sure.
one more step. Now this has a story to it.
Yes, I actually picked this up while I was in Laos. In my time in Thailand, I traveled to Laos, and I picked this up at a boutique shop in Vientiane, which is the capital of Laos. And
Say it one more time for us.
Vientiane.
Okay.
In the capital is the capital of Laos, and this particular pattern, it's cotton fiber textile, and this particular pattern is very I guess unique to a certain region of the country that my parents were from, which is the southern province, and it's called Savannakhet. And once I heard that, and knowing that it had roots in the place where my parents were from, and I just felt a need to pick it up and wear it whenever I want to be proud of my show, sort of be proud of my heritage, if you will. So. this one. It makes my mother happy, I hope.
Well, listen, there was a very special way that you shared your heritage that was fortunate, very fortunate to join in your tour of a very auspicious occasion and a very unusual one. So I wonder if you could tell us a little bit more about the dedication.
Okay. Well, the dedication was a dedication of a structure, specifically the ordination hall. And what that structure will be used for is the ordainment of new monks into the monastery. And it's a rather auspicious event for Laotian Buddhists, because there's a belief that when you contribute to the monastic life and to the order of monks and nuns that carry on the teachings and practices of Buddhism, that there is a ton of merit and good fortune that comes with that, and that gets distributed to your next life. And that doesn't necessarily mean when you die you're reborn and you'll have all this great wealth, but it could also mean within this life you go through cycles of rebirth, conceptually, if you will, or spiritually. And by contributing to the construction of this space, and it gives one a Buddhist so much merit, and so it was a really intense labor of love, I suppose, for the community. And it's been going on for 3 years, and every day for those 3 years there were 13 monks in residence on the temple grounds, and the temple is out in Koto.
Do we have a picture of this? Or
Oh, yeah.
my.
Well, these let's just scroll through some of these images. These are just
Okay.
some images over the years of some of the festivals and parades that have happened out in this Laotian community in Broussard or in Koto in Iberia Parish. And the biggest festival is Laotian New Year's Festival, which usually occurs during Easter time. It doesn't necessarily happen at the same time in Laos. It follows the lunar cycles, actually,
Yes.
but in the American context there's a need to do it during Easter because of the American work week, everyone's off during that time in the American holidays. And so these are just some images from the temple grounds and some of the festivals, and this is an image of a monk here accepting offerings. This is a structure, the new temple or sermon hall, which is a large gathering space for communal chanting and sermons. These are people lining up around the temple grounds to give offerings to the monks. This is the ordination hall that we were talking about. This was a picture from a few years back of it under construction, and yeah, it was primarily 13 monks on the residence on the temple grounds. And this is what it looks like now.
Oh my
correct.
goodness, and the fountain and all the gold. I remember the
Right.
ornate design and all kinds of gold.
Landscape. It's just so beautiful, and there's so much pride in the community.
Yes.
After putting so much effort and energy into this for 3 years, that it finally has reached. But it's been an ongoing thing, or ongoing, I guess, a big dream since the inception of the community to begin, since 1985, when there was a formal group, a formalized corporation that was set up to form this community and form this temple. Slowly over the years, different structures were constructed on the grounds, and now we got to this point where this is probably the most
look at
important
that.
structure on the temple grounds now. And
my.
we are just, as a community, as a Laotian community, have so much pride in the accomplishment that was achieved here. And yeah, and hopefully we'll have some good fortune that comes from completing this. But
Right, and so I got to see some of the ceremony around the dedication of this particular hall, and that I think after that it's sealed off, not sealed, that it's only used for
the monks, yes.
For the monks,
The monks, when they become ordained, they take several vows. One of the vows is a vow of celibacy. So after the space becomes dedicated, it becomes closed off to women, and it's used exclusively for the monks praying and chanting.
Right, but you do also have nuns. Now,
We do have nuns.
I have to make one thing clear, because I noticed during the tour that the Catholics were really caught up in the fact that y'all had just ordained 200 nuns.
Yeah.
And they were saying, where is there room for all of them, and so forth. And you were explaining, as some of us are familiar with the Theravada Buddhism, that it's not necessarily a permanent
No.
vow, that a person can take the vow for just a couple of years as they're a young adult.
Correct.
And experience that life, and then return, or whatever period of time, I don't know, and
Right.
then return to
That's correct. I mean, I even went through a period of ordainment or time as a monk, and it's tradition and customary in Laotian families to, if you have a son or sons, that they'll, after they reach a certain age, usually after 20, they'll go through a period of living as a monk, and this is thought to have, because you're contributing to this, sustaining the practices and the teachings of Buddha, and which are all about having right thoughts and right actions and right speech, and all, you know, just doing good, and
right.
performing meritorious acts that you gain through your son or sons. You gain some level of good fortune that gets transferred to the family as well. So there, so people, for that particular occasion, they went through. There was an evening where they had 200 nuns, and they had an all-night fasting ceremony and chanting and praying ceremony, and they just did it for an evening, and
All night.
Yeah, all night, and then at 6 a.m. they were derobed, or had their holy robes removed and cast back out into the normal world, as we say.
Oh, cast back into the normal world.
Yes, yes.
Oh, but they were in some way dedicated in return. And so there is a temporary or ordination or whatever, and keeping alive this religion that goes back, I don't know, 300 BC or something. It's
Yes. The birth of Buddha was said to be circa 500.
Oh, 500.
60 BC.
Oh, right. He was before Socrates.
Yes, and for about 400 years, the practices and the teachings were passed down through oral tradition, and then and then it became written. And a lot of the chanting that you'll hear at the temple, if you go, and it's open to the public, they're very welcome to people coming in to observe, as long as they respect, you know, some of the etiquette rules of taking off your shoes and keeping your head below the monks, and, you know, dressing modestly. You could go and listen to the monks chant, and, you know, and they chant in the ancient language that was part of Buddha's time, and they call it Pali, P-A-L-I, Pali language, and it's not Laotian, right? But it's this language that's from that time. It's just the teachings, basically, is what the chants are.
Well, the 8 ways or whatever. Let's see. Now, at the beginning, we said sabadi, which is hello, I think?
Yeah, I mean, it's the greeting, customary greeting in Laos. Sabadi, you usually clasp your hands together like this and slightly bow forward and say sabadi, and that's generally for lay people. For monks, if you go to a temple, there's a special greeting. You usually go all the way to the ground, and you bow 3 times, putting your head and hands all the way to the floor. And the 3 times is sort of honoring the three different, I guess you can call it sort of holy trinity of Buddhism in a way. One is you paying respects to the Buddha, and the second is you're paying respects to his teachings and the practices, and then the third, you're paying respects to the order of monks and nuns that sustain the practices.
Very interesting,
Yes.
very interesting. Well, we've got about 5 minutes or so.
Okay.
Let me ask you about you wore some special, your wrist, you wore some
Oh,
special,
sure.
what do you call those? Threads, I don't know what you call them, but they
Mhm.
have some of those, you said not all of them, but some of them are from special occasions.
Yes, some of them were part of a ceremony that a lot of Laotian Buddhists practice. There's a belief that one soul in the Theravada Buddhism, there's a belief that one soul is mobile and it can leave the body, leaving one in a state of destitute, if you will, or have someone fall ill. And so before someone makes a journey of some sort in their life, whether they are moving to an entirely new place like New York or whatever, or they're about to travel or they're about to start a new job, or if they have kids, something that marks a certain milestone in their life where things change. There's a ceremonies that a researcher, sociologist who studied this community. I believe his name is Dr. Carl Bankston, and he did this study in the 90s and on Theravada Buddhism and its influence in this community, and how do people sort of frame their lives around this religion and reconstruct a new community for themselves through the lens of this faith. And he wrote about it as being the invocation of the soul, so that before one takes these journeys, there's a ceremony where you'll have a monk or your parents or somebody come in, other community members, tie one of these sort of holy blessing strings around you, and speak to yourself as they're doing it. And so the monk would tie it, they'll just say something like, "Oh, may you stay on a clear and good path and not lose track in sight of being a good person." And so speaking to the soul and invoking it to remain and be part of you, if you will. And it binds the soul to the body, if you will. It's symbolically, right? And it's a very interesting ceremony, and it's great fashion too, I think.
Well, I think bracelets are in now.
Yes, maybe they'll come in, so go out and get your bracelets.
Well, yes, we did see in the ordination hall, that was, as you said, the secular people, or whatever you call it, were allowed in and bowing, and beautiful ornate murals, again, all the gold and so forth, and bowing
Those were
to
all locally done by the monks and the people there, all local craftspeople. They received the plans and the drawings from I think out of the country, but the actual making of all those detail, all the motifs and the reliefs were all carved locally. So it's quite amazing.
Wow, it was very ornate, or is very ornate and colorful. So people would.
Maybe we could show some of those images.
Yes, I'd like to see some more of that. Oh, look at this.
Yeah, so all the detailing, the blue glass mosaic tiles, mirrored glass tiles, when the sun rises, it's facing directly east, the front of this building, and when the sun rises, it catches that sunrise and throws wonderful lights. Even at nighttime, the landscape.
And these are monks.
These are monks exiting after a ceremony. In the evening, there's the light when all the lights up. They don't keep the lights on all the time, just on special occasions, and it just catches the evening lantern lights and post lights so beautifully.
Yes, yes.
And this is it during the day. And you see a lot of these, a lot of Southeast Asian Buddhist architectural influence. So it's akin to a lot of things you'll see in Thailand and Laos and in Cambodia, the architecture.
Wow, that's really special. And who knew that we had, or most of us didn't know about, well, maybe some of us do, I think there has been an influence.
Most don't. I mean, the community has been so sheltered, I guess, in its own way, and very secluded to themselves. And right now we're a group of people in the community are trying to create programs to educate more of the general public about the cultural diversity in this particular community in the parish. And we've already received some grants from the state for this to do some programs and do some marketing on the temple grounds, and yeah, we're slowly moving forward, and I'm back helping out with as much of that as I can.
Well, we're awfully glad that you could share some of your very busy time with us and some of your special experiences.
You're welcome. It's my pleasure.
And thank you for sharing with us more about the Laotian community in Iberia Parish, and I'm sure throughout our region. This is Barbara Connor. Thank you for watching Voting Smart, Thursdays at 7:30.